Alright, so as always, to kick things off, we're going to do a Rails new command, and this one won't have any flags like we've done in the past. I used a Webpacker gem in the past that kind of made our app friendly to the JavaScript atmosphere, but we're not going to worry about that so much in this one. This is more about relationships and admin roles and all of that fancy stuff that is pretty much required in any major web app out there. So let's go ahead and do a Rails new. I'll bump up the size here so you guys can see, hopefully. And this will be, we could just call it discussions maybe. I called it forum on the other one, but I'm going to roll with discussions. And we'll scaffold that out. It should create quite a few things for us and run bundle install as always. And we're going to make use of quite a few gems in this series. Many are what we've used before. Others are kind of revolving around the user role aspect. And then some are to help render with Markdown. And one thing I forgot to mention in the first video is we made our URLs pretty. But what I mean by that is it actually creates a slug for the URL instead of an ID, which we've been using in the past. So you'd always see a number instead of something else, and it was kind of just a pain in the ass. So Rails, it works with all the IDs and that's fun, but when you link to someone, they're never going to remember a number. So dealing with the ID or the slug of the URL of the page will do wonders. And this is going to take some time, so I'll probably fast forward through this. Looks like it's installing a gem that's going to take forever. So hang on. All right, we got our app installed. Let's go ahead and CD into our discussions app. And as always, you'll find this on GitHub. Definitely download it and compare for your own sake. I would recommend typing along with me if you can. I'll probably speed some of this stuff up just because it takes forever and it's just kind of mundane. So reference, the files as always. So let's open this up in our text editor. And I'm going to actually put this in a new window. And I like to reference the demo project. So I'm going to have that open in my very first window here to the left. It's called Demo Forum. And the one to the very right will be the new app we just created. So to kick things off, since I'm already installing some gems, I'm going to start there again. And I actually have some in a file that I've downloaded. This is kind of just, when I start a new project, I'll kind of type out a list of what I want to have happen and see how far I can get. I find this pretty useful in terms of, thinking about relationships and what should belong to what and all of that stuff, which Rails is pretty, it helps you a lot to do using the has many and belongs to kind of thing, which we'll get into if you're not familiar. But I find just writing it out always helps, as well as user roles, stuff like that. But this is kind of just for the sake of making this easy to blog about later, but I'm going to find our little gem list I created right here. And this is what it'll be in the repo. And if you're watching this at a later date, you might go check that these versions are up to spec because they could be out of date. So as always, there's a timestamp on anything with the code, so definitely give it some attention. So let me go through these. We're using Bulma as always. It's just the CSS framework for basically making things easy on me when I'm just exploring Rails a bit with you. Simple form for simpler forms. Devise is going to be our user authentication platform. It's just kind of scaffolds it out for us, makes it easier to do, so we don't have to roll it our own way each time. I like to use gravatars for user accounts, so any user who signs up automatically uses their email with Devise, and by that I can grab their gravatar if they have one. You have to sign up at gravatar.com to get one, which is easy to do. We also have jQuery for some comment functionality. I'd like a user to be able to submit a comment, or what I call replies in this case, to a discussion, and I want it to just happen and not refresh the page. So that's what happens with jQuery. You can do that without jQuery. It's just easier. So sue me. There's a couple of gems I use to help with our admin user role, and one's called Rollify, one's called can. Definitely cool to hook into Devise and make a admin user role. And then there's one called Friendly ID, which helps create slugs for our URLs, and it's just responsible for making what used to be numbers as a URL and making it an actual slug, which is easier to remember when you share it with someone. And then we have two gems called Code Ray and Red Carpet. Red Carpet's a markdown parser. So anytime you type in markdown in a field and submit it, it can kind of take what's submitted, pass it through a bunch of parameters. It's basically endless, and come out the other side. You can use validation within it, and it should format things great. And Code Ray hooks into Markdown. You'll see how I do that with a helper coming up, and basically just formats any code that comes through the pipe. So that's how you saw what was code on the initial app, which I'm already losing somewhere. I think it's here. It just shouldn't be. Yeah, right there. So you just basically, if you want to really get technical, if you look at the code block, if you define what kind of code it is using these 3 backticks, it'll go ahead and format that correctly when you go ahead and save it. So great. So with that done, we can save that down, and then I'll hit bundle install, or you can just run bundle. And there's some setup to do here. As always, I like to initialize Git. Looks like there's already one there, so we can just go ahead and let's do basic init. Great, cool, grand, wonderful. Next, we need to kind of get some foundation work laid. So as always, simple form is a repo we pretty much always use, and I'm going to refer to it because there's always a learning curve to remembering how to install it. So bear with me, I'll fast forward for this if it takes forever, but I think this will be helpful for you if you can't figure out as well. Just easy to go find it on Google and do the same stuff. So there's this generator bundled with simple form. It's called Rails generate simple form install. We can go ahead and do that. I like to use simple form install first because Devise uses forms when it gets when you generate the views, and from that I want it to use simple forms. So you'll notice it creates a template here when we do scaffold forms, and it uses that stuff as the template instead of the traditional Rails template. Just kind of something you figure out by using it. It's nothing you just should know, so don't worry about it if you didn't. It's not a big deal. You'll just have to type it out later. Okay, so with simple form good, we should be good to go. Next, we can do Devise. Let me double check that, Jim. Yeah, so we can do Devise now. And I apologize if I'm going fast. If you want to see a more in-depth take on this, go see my videos before this. There's probably a couple series that would get you going and make it seem a little more comprehensive, I guess is the way to put it. Okay, so we're going to do another generator for Devise, Rails generate Devise install, and it gives you kind of a laundry list of things to do here. If we need to set a default action mailer URL, and that's found in our config environments development. I just throw it at the bottom. You can do whatever you want. We aren't going to do a lot with mailers in this one, so it's just here just because. I did do more with mailers in a previous series where we basically required a user to confirm their account when they signed up. In this case, I'm not doing that, so it's not a big deal. All right, so we've got that. Let's go back to, let's make sure this is in, we need a root path in our index. What did I set the app as? I think it was discussions. So discussions index. So we'll get to that in a second. I'm gonna generate our views, or actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna copy my views from a previous project. literally you should just do the same, I think, because it's really not that much that we haven't already gone over. If you're following along all my series, I have to find this crap. Demo, forum, app, views. Where are we at? Devise. Can pretty much just copy this folder and add it to your views. So let's go back to this app, discussions, app, views. We've already got our layouts in there. Devise. Great. And one only thing really to note about those, I'll walk you through. App, views, devise. So say registrations, edit. I did add this block here, and it's basically, which we'll get into, saying, hey, check if this user is an admin. If they are, go ahead and display this text, and it'll just tell that user when they go to edit their account that they're currently an admin user. It's really only going to happen if to like the 2 people that are an admin on the app. Maybe there'll be a team. If so, they'll see it too. That's just stuff we just can add to the view that kind of conditionally displays based on the user role. So that's kind of a cool thing. We'll get into that in a future episode. Other thing is the field itself. We've created a username level. If you're copying files from, say, a previous version I've done of this kind of series, a build series, it's going to be different because I'm using a different name here. So definitely pay attention to that. Because we're adding a username field to a user who signs up, because I want that username to display on the front end. So with that done, that kind of takes care of a lot of the work. I do want to update our layout. It's looking pretty minimal here, but we're going to go ahead and reference the first project to get that up to speed. So I'll go to views, layouts, application. I'll just basically copy and paste this for now, and then walk you through stuff that we might need to walk through. We don't have this yet, so just comment that out or hash it out. And I think that's good. I call it discussions here. So we are rendering. I have for some reason this in here twice. Font awesome, which I'm referencing for our replies when we get to those. That's kind of ported into Bulma, so it's just something to look out for. Same with all these classes and stuff. That's just Bulma stuff, so you can customize this to your liking. I'm using a pretty minimal layout, so it's not a big deal so far. But I'm gonna go ahead and do this for this one too. Anything that's user is fine. We generated the devise stuff. We still need to add the username field to devise, so that's something let's go ahead and do. But first, I'm gonna just get this set up. And then while I'm at it, since I just talked about Bulma, I'll add that to our style sheets. So I'm gonna change this file to SCSS, and it's in assets, style sheets, and then application, and just add import Bulma and save it. And we won't be focusing a ton on styles in this one either. It's not the point of Ruby on Rails at this stage. So that's why we're using Bulma. I may do different videos on like CSS, maybe CSS grid. Everyone seems to be doing those though, so I don't know. It's kind of just a cool way to explore it, but we'll see. Now we need to just run we still need a root, and I don't really want to add, I don't know that I added a controller that was like a home controller. I did just at the beginning just to get things set up. So I guess I'll do that real quick. So let's generate a home controller. Rails G controller home. And then you could just put index because we only want that action. And it creates a bunch of stuff which we don't really need, but I'm okay with it. If you were doing this production code, you might, omit all that stuff unless you need tests and stuff on that, which we won't be getting into in this series, but maybe we will in the future. Okay, so I have home controller now with an index action. Now I can set that to my root path. So we can go to config, routes, and it's set to home index get, but we just want to actually make that root. And instead of the slash pattern, we'll do index or home dash index. All right, cool. So now Devise is able to start up and run. We can just double check everything by running our server and see what happens. It should just go ahead and point to a blank screen, but it looks like I have an error. Initialize address already in use. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I have it running. That would make sense. So I'm gonna cut that one down. That's my old app, my demo app, I should say. Let's do that again. Cool. So now we can go to the browser, go to, this should reload. Of course, it's gonna give me an error because that doesn't exist. And we should just see a root index page. And because users signed in, we didn't go ahead and generate the model. So let me backtrack. There's still some work to be done for Devise. So let's go back and do that. If we reference the guide, we did the install, but we still need to generate the Devise model. So let's do that next. So we can just copy, we can do that. Rails generate Devise, and then user is gonna be, I like to just capitalize it. Typically for a model, you capitalize the thing and it's a singular naming convention. So that's just something to remember. It's kind of a Rails thing. So we'll go ahead and run that. That creates a migration, which will have a ton of fields for the user. Creates a model, test units, and also the routes and the config file. So we can just run rakedb or Rails DB migrate, whichever you want. And it should do its thing. And what that did, if you're not sure, I've shown this in the past. If you go to migrate folder in your DB folder, created this migration, and you can go ahead and just run. We've already run the migration, so it's in our schema now, and you'll see it here. In this file, you don't want to change by hand. It just gets automatically generated, but it created all these fields in our database, which is just SQLite in this case, but we can use any other database if you really want to. If you ever wanted to know how to change your database, you can go to config database, and it does all this stuff. You can set environment variables and, you know, kind of connect to certain databases based on what you want. SQLite 3 is the default. I use Postgres, I guess is the name, yeah, for production stuff, because that's kind of what Heroku recommends. That's kind of that provider I use for it. It's kind of worth mentioning in case you wanted to actually scale an app. Maybe I'll do a video where we have actually launched to Heroku. It's really easy actually, so we'll get going there. Okay, so with Devise installed, we can go ahead and run our server now and see what happens. And it's probably going to throw another error. Oh, we got it. Okay, cool. So this is going to throw an error because we don't have our username class yet. So the sign up route is going to do this for you if you've gotten this far. So let's go ahead and add that real quick, and we'll probably wrap up this video, and that'll kind of be the initial setup of getting users and everything set up. So let's do that, and we can go ahead and start with the controllers. This one we need to create a registrations controller, and this hooks into Devise. So we'll actually reference a class that's like a kind of a child of Devise. So you'll see it depends on this registration controller that's in Devise. If I could spell. There we go. Then we can do an end. And these are going to be private methods. I've done this before. We're basically just allowing a new parameter to be passed when a user signs up for an account. And Rails is smart in the sense of it doesn't let anything you don't declare as permittable through the pipes, for lack of a better term. So for a user, we're going to require it to permit these things. And the new one is going to be username, but we already allow email, password, and then password confirmation. Make sure you spell it right. And then that's for signing up. We also need one for updating our account. So account update. I'm not naming these either. These are part of Devise. So these things, they just kind of ship with it. So you kind of just have to know that. There is great documentation on Devise. So if you ever aren't sure, definitely check out the repo on GitHub. It'll kind of point you in the right direction. Some stuff though is out of date, so be wary. As Rails grows, stuff changes. So we're gonna pass in almost the same stuff here. Oops. Do that, and then current password to update your account. So let's double check your spelling, email, password confirmation require. Yep, that looks good. And then we also need to update our routes to basically use this registrations controller as opposed to the built-in one. So let's go to our routes. And we've got our route path and Devise for users. I'm going to put our route at the very top. And Devise for users lower. And you can comma separate this to use specific controllers. And we're just going to use registrations as registrations. Easy enough. So that should complete our actual sign up process. So we should be able to go ahead and sign up now with a username. Probably should restart my server. Still doing it. What's this? Username. What am I missing? Oh, okay. We still need to add, our username to our database. You notice in our schema, we don't have the username field. So let's find it. We've got our email, reset password token, and all these things, but we need a username field. So let's go ahead and add that one. It's just going to be a string. So we can do a migration, I should say. So Rails generate migration, and you can kind of call this, you can call it migration something that makes sense to what you're doing, and Rails is kind of smart to know what it's going to do. So in my case, I'm going to camel case add username to users. So users is our model, and it's a plural in this case, and the field I'm adding is username. So Rails is going to understand that. And then I'm going to add username, and it's going to be a string. So we can run that. And it creates a migration. So we can go back and verify that worked. And you'll see we're adding to the column users username, which is a string. That's perfect. So let's just run Rails DB migrate, and that should migrate itself into our schema this time. And to verify, you'll see a new field username right there. And if you really wanted to make this fancy, you can make that thing unique just by passing unique true to it. In fact, we could do that now, but I'm not going to really worry about that. That's something you could do later just to enhance your application. We'll also get into some validation at some point too in this app. So we'll talk about that soon. With that done, we can go ahead and do our server again. Double check that this page loads. There it is. So we have our sign up field. I'm going to just create a new user, and it redirects me to the home page. So that's great. So obviously our app doesn't do shit yet, but we've got plenty of stuff to get things rolling. I don't have that role yet, so we can't edit our user role, but we'll get into that coming up. So this is taking shape already, and new discussion doesn't link to a discussion yet, but we'll get into that very next video. So I will see you in that one.